We are committed to taking people and institutions with whom we work beyond the land acknowledgement.
We are committed to supporting and empowering Indigenous peoples and their communities.
We are mindful of the truth that for thousands of years, the Marys River, or Pinifu, band of the Calpuya have been in relationship with the land where Oregon State University in Corvallis, Oregon now sits, and where we now live and work.
We acknowledge that they were forcibly removed to reservations in Western Oregon and that their living descendants are part of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians.
We value the long and deep interactions they have with the land, and we aspire to honor and manifest that value in our work and in our lives.
Patrick and Vicki Stone have created an award that recognizes what it means to devote ourselves to what we love, practice it deeply, get really, really good at it, and then figure out how we want to share it.
Getting recognition and being able to celebrate the work that writers do in the world and why that matters feels so important.
As a writer, knowing that we have that kind of respect on a college campus means a lot for me as a faculty member, and I think it also does a lot for our students who are endeavoring to be writers themselves.
The Stone Award for Literary Achievement is fundamentally about community, about coming together around the power of writing.
It's really important to have writers of Kimmerer's caliber brought to our community.
It's such a great opportunity for the graduate students I teach, for the undergrads who are interested in creative writing, and for the community to interact with the writer and to see great writing up close.
Robin's work teaches us that grammar is a way of seeing, and that to restore our relationship with the land, we need to restory it, using what she calls the grammar of animacy.
Robin's work really inspires me as an Indigenous writer myself.
Robin's work gets me reminiscing on my childhood on the Yakima Reservation and reminds all the readers of the appreciation we need to have for the world around us.
Robin's writing is guidance not just for the next generation of storytellers, but for the next generation of stories.
Kimmerer's writing really highlights the vitality of Indigenous knowledge.
Robin's work inspires us to cherish and take care of the world around us.
Kimmerer's writing teaches us how powerful wonder can be and how prayerful scientific inquiry can be.
Kimmerer's writing, it gives me hope for our future as a collective, I think, and it also inspires wonder and compassion for the natural world.
We can change a whole world of people's mindsets with the power of writing.
We can change what once seemed to be unshakable pillars of reality with the power of writing.
There is nothing we can't change. We can change anything with writing.
Anything. We can change anything with the power of writing.
Good evening. Welcome to the 2024 Stone Award. And welcome to Prax. I'm Larry Rodgers. I'm Dean of the Oregon State College of Liberal Arts. And please permit me a few minutes to cover a good bit of ground. Since its opening the first week of April, Prax has already hosted 20 different events with over 8,000 attendees. I want to offer a special welcome to first-time visitors to this magnificent new campus edition. And as examples of opportunities outside this lovely concert hall that you're now in, I'll call attention to our exhibit next door, Sonic Booms, How the Sound and Science of Technology Created Pop Music, which will be here for several more months, as well as invite you to meander anytime through the Dixie, Luana, Wooten, Kinney strolling garden just south of the building. It's a demonstration garden focusing on Pacific Northwest plants, including a celebration of ethnobotany and indigenous plant knowledge. The gardens are beginning to bloom, as they are in our home gardens. The hop sculpture out here on the west side has begun its summer climb upward. And do take note when you're out there of the hammocks, which are indeed part of the garden, part of Prax. But if you want to try them out, actually you'll have to fight students for a spot, as they've pretty much been fully inhabited, fully booked since opening day. I'm so pleased, or I guess I should say I'm honored, to welcome our distinguished writer, Robin Wall Kimmerer, to campus, and congratulate her as the 6th winner of the Stone Award for Literary Achievement. I'm in my 16th and final year as dean, and I can confidently say that if awarding our 1,100 plus CLA graduates their diplomas at our commencement ceremony is the most meaningful thing I have the privilege of doing every year, the Stone Award for Literary Achievement comes in a solid second. This is such an impressive and important event, attested to by your presence here to celebrate this occasion, and of course, you've noticed Prax has sold out. Let me give you a little bit of background. This award is based on the generosity of OSU alum Patrick Stone and his wife Vicki, who established the prize to spotlight one of OSU's best-kept secrets, the MFA program in creative writing, as a signature feature of CLA's excellence. Patrick served 2 tours in the Vietnam War, then enrolled at OSU after hearing a lecture by renowned OSU history professor William Appleman Williams. Patrick earned a bachelor's degree in history and credits the College of Liberal Arts at OSU with giving him what he called the intellectual confidence and sense of perspective that have served him professionally and personally. He has had a highly successful business career and is currently executive chairman of the Williston Financial Group in Portland, which he founded in 2009. I will say on a personal note that one of my greatest pleasures in working at OSU has been getting to know Patrick and Vicki. There are no better OSU supporters anywhere, bar none, and no better people. Also with us tonight is their daughter Samantha, a recent Beaver alum, of course, right? And she's currently a graduate student in archaeology. And I should mention that Sam opined very early on in the selection process for this year's award that Braiding Sweetgrass has long been one of her favorite books. As the father of a daughter myself, I know that when the daughter speaks, mom and dad listen. Patrick's not only been a fantastic ambassador for explaining why his business success has come from his training in the liberal arts, he's also a deeply read, thoughtful person with a gift for understanding what universities should be doing to create better worlds. On behalf of the College of Liberal Arts, and speaking personally, thank you to the Stone family. Several years back, the nation's signature creative writing publication, Poets and Writers, ended its long-standing practice of ranking the nation's MFA programs, even acknowledging how problematic such a ranking can be, perhaps especially in the arts. As a dean, I still can't help but take pride in the fact that, well, we were on the list. OSU's program was named as one of the top 25 programs in the nation. OSU has many nationally prominent graduate programs, but this evening, for our hometown literary audience, let's just celebrate the fact that at our STEM-heavy land-grant university, our MFA program remains one of the very most selective, highly regarded graduate programs at OSU. Hundreds of applicants, 12 extraordinarily talented students each year. Now, indulge me a quick detour, okay? You'll like it. One of the main reasons for the program's longstanding success can be tied to the origins of the Stone Award. Patrick, Sean Scoville, and the foundation, and I were having interesting conversations back around 2009 around ways that Patrick might help us showcase the liberal arts at a time when it was struggling to get the recognition that it fully deserved. The creative writing program seemed like a natural focus, especially since it was led at the time by distinguished professor Tracy Doherty, one of the program's founders. Several conversations with Tracy later, we moved forward with his vision around an award that showcased not a single literary work, like the Pulitzer Prize, for example, but honored a career of writing, paying special attention to writers who exhibit impact in positive ways on other writers, especially student writers. So kudos to Tracy, who's actually here tonight, which gives me an opportunity to say something else. Tracy is one of the most distinguished and prolific authors and scholars that OSU has produced in its 150-plus year history, with dozens of novels, dozens, that's plural, biographies, and creative nonfiction to his name, alongside multiple Oregon Book Awards, front page New York Times book reviews, and too many accolades for me to name. I just mentioned the word Pulitzer, by the way. Just last week, this week's Pulitzer Prizes were announced, and Tracy's magisterial biography on fellow Texan Larry McMurtry was one of only 3 finalists in the category of biography. So, let's indeed recognize Tracy both for what he did for the Stone Award and for continuing to bring the kind of literary distinction that puts the phrases Pulitzer Prize and Oregon State University in the same sentence. Thank you, Tracy. The Stone Award is a $20,000 biennial award. The inaugural award was given in 2012 to Joyce Carol Oates. It was awarded to the novelist and short story writer in 2014, Tobias Wolff. In 2016, the American Poet Laureate Rita Dove. In 2019, the Pulitzer Prize and National Book Award winning novelist and essayist, Colson Whitehead. And in 2021, in the throes of the pandemic, to the illustrated novelist and cartoonist, Lynda Barry. Robin Wall Kimmerer, as an essayist, poet, writer of creative nonfiction, and distinguished scientist, joins quite a club. If you're looking for a unifying thread among these disparate writers, it's founded not only in their shared distinction, but, and I think this is really important for the Stone Award, in their collective, outward-facing generosity of vision and spirit. We've always imagined the Stone Award as a forum for the celebration of the written word, and I think the reel that you just watched made that point better than I ever could. In fact, this evening is the culmination of an amazing variety of classroom and outreach activities, some of which were featured on the board behind you before this started, that have been going on over the past months around the achievements of our honoree. The School of Writing, Literature, and Film donated copies of Braiding Sweetgrass for young adults to Corvallis High School and Crescent Valley students, and the high school led an extracurricular book group to study the book. Lydia Tatar, our advisor and instructor of writing, literature, and film, and one of the people you saw on the reel, by the way, established the first ever Stone Award Book Club, a 1-credit course for students across the university, and more than 50 students took the class across all colleges. There's been community discussions at the Corvallis Public Library, led by creative writing faculty, and earlier today, there was an OPB live broadcast just outside this space in the Toomey lobby. I also want to give a quick thanks to members of the creative writing program, led by Director Elena Passarello, Tim Jensen, Director of the school, and Sean Scoville and his colleagues at the OSU Foundation, all of whom worked tirelessly to bring you an event. I also want to mention that after Robin is on stage, Elena will join her for a conversation following her presentation. So stay tuned for that too. I want to thank President Jayati Murthy, in attendance tonight, alongside Provost Ed Fazer, also here, for their unwavering support for our best liberal arts programs. Lots going on to suggest that tonight is so much more than just handing out an award, but it is still that. So let me turn to introducing tonight's awardee. She describes herself as a mother, a scientist, decorated professor, and enrolled member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, which I was familiar with, I should say, from an early age, as its tribal headquarters for the nearly 38,000 members is just down the road from where I grew up in central Oklahoma. She's a SUNY Distinguished Teaching Professor of Environmental Biology and the founder and director of the Center for Native Peoples and the Environment. Our plant scientists in the audience have long recognized her as one of the foremost bryophyte scholars in the world. The roughly 20,000 plant species the rest of us know, of course, as moss. The early contours of her hybrid approach to writing can be seen in her OSU Press book, Gathering Moss, from 2003, which combines memoir, indigenous storytelling, science writing, and restoration ecology as a means of coming together to make sense of the planet's oldest plants. For me, her ethos is embodied in her observation that, quote, traditional knowledge is rooted in intimacy with a local landscape where the land itself is the teacher. Or, as she says less scientifically several pages later, you can't hear the rustle of corn leaves in a box of Fruit Loops. This reference is apt as she returns to corn near the end of braiding sweetgrasses, readers will remember, retelling the Mayan story of creation that puts people of the corn as the sustainers of the earth, and therefore the story as a model to, quote, create sustainable humanity, gratitude, and capacity for reciprocity. Hear those words, gratitude, reciprocity. It is her gift in all of her writing to give us a vocabulary rooted in appreciation, respect, reverence, and history, and based on indigenous sources. Vocabulary that engages our senses to make us not just visualize, but to hear, smell, feel the natural world around us in the smallest, most intimate ways. That vocabulary and the reason I believe that Braiding Sweetgrass has so resonated with readers is founded on reframing a fear-driven, frightening narrative of environmental crisis, fully justified, a challenge so large that as individuals it can overwhelm our coping skills, and we can tend to fold before it. And she turns it into a personal, precise, psychically manageable narrative around why the earth is worth working to preserve. Capturing the why may be the greatest gift that her facility in teaching us about indigenous sources can bestow on her readership. Braiding Sweetgrass has been on the New York Times bestseller list for 213 weeks, selling over 2 million copies. The writer's task, as I often think of it, is to defamiliarize in fresh ways the commonplace lens through which we can comprehend our place in the world. Writing about nature, like writing about love, death, connection, and loss, is as old as the world itself. We've all heard that before. So how is the writer to jar us so that attention can be paid? How do we ponder a black ash tree, cedars, or even moss anew in undiscovered ways? Robin Wall Kimmerer has found the answer in newly harvesting what she calls, quote, the web of reciprocity of giving and taking by being activated in the end by, in her words, love for the world. Please help me welcome to the stage Stone Award winner for Literary Achievement, Robin Wall Kimmerer.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Miigwech friends. It's so good to be back in Corvallis with old friends and new, and I'm so grateful to be here with you. I want to begin, as I always do in our language, and say to you, Bojo indino e maganodok, Shabadas kegish kokwe nadeshnakas, Budwe wadme kwenda, Megazeto dem, Minwa makodo dem. And in our beautiful Potawatomi language, I give you greetings and tell you that I'm a Potawatomi woman of the Bear Clan and of the Eagles, and I am so grateful that we are here together. Oh, good, those slides are here, but there's a small problem. Hold on a second, technology. I can't see my slides here to advance them, so if somebody could help, that would be great. Let me try something. It worked. Okay, good. Sorry for the interruption. It is also part of our traditional protocol that we always begin with gratitude because we are showered daily with the gifts of the earth. Food to eat, sweet air to breathe, the preciousness of water, the companionship of clouds and geese and maple trees, gratitude for one another, for the privilege of our shared work, and for the original Kalapuyan peoples in whose homelands we meet today. And let us use this gratitude, this moment of gratitude, to offer our intention that as we give thanks for the gifts of the earth, that we might promise to live in such a way that the earth will be grateful for us. I also offer gratitude to those who came before, who cleared the path that I could be here today. My ancestors, my family, my parents, budding naturalists who somehow got all six of us to share one pair of binoculars and fall in love with birding. And speaking of literary achievement, my mom, who stitched together by hand my very first book at 8 years old, a little collection of nature poems that make me grimace today. To my grandparents, especially to my grandfather, who was a survivor of the Indian boarding schools, and to my grandma, who never let us forget who we are. Gratitude for the first so-called nature writers in the oral tradition, the enduring oral literature of Indigenous storytellers. And gratitude for this profound honor of being recognized with the Stone Award, to Pat and Vicki Stone for their vision and generosity, which makes all of this possible. Another round of applause for our benefactors. When I conceived of braiding sweetgrass more than a decade ago, I knew what I wanted to write, but I did not know if anyone would want to read it. And despite a lifetime of a reader, I'd never seen my own sort of story on a page. A native scientist, someone in love with land and with language, with spirit and with science. I didn't have an agent, but I sent it off anyway, like a little milkweed seed on the wind. And then when I was asked in this process what sort of book this was it a plant book, an indigenous storybook, an environmental book, a feminist science book? I couldn't really say. All of the above? Was this a memoir or a manifesto? And when folks asked, well, as if this would help me, what section of the bookstore does it belong in? The answer that usually came back was nature writing. So as we celebrate the goals of Prax in this wonderful space to integrate art, writing, and science, I want to amend the nice introduction that you just gave me. And in the interest of that integration of science and art, tell you that I'm not who you think I am. I am so much more. Because standing before you are 1 billion microbial cells who are running my gut and therefore my brain, about 3,000 invertebrates on my surface, innumerable fungi, to say nothing of the fact that every one of my cells has been colonized by a symbiotic prokaryote who took up residence as a mitochondrion millions of years ago and has been with all of us animals ever since. My bones are not me, but the minerals from the soil and from my groundwater. My muscles are full of carbon on short-term loan from corn. And the breath that oxygenates my blood and my brain is the exhalation of trees. I had a cup of my favorite white pine tea today, and that white pine does not stand alone. Qi is inseparable from the mycorrhizal network, linking Qi to myriad others, the nitrifying bacteria who nestle in the needles, the bark beetles, the nuthatch. The pine is no more an individual than I am. We are all part of the great green we. So thank you for those kind words of introduction, but I can't claim sole credit. I tell you this because if we are to talk about being a nature writer, where is the boundary between nature and the nature writer? In Western anthropocentric worldview, they are separate, humans as distinct from nature. But in the kin-centric indigenous worldview, that boundary is blurred. So who exactly is the writer? Me or the white pine? And we're going to come back to that. So in this time when both the idea of nature and the reality of nature is changing before our very eyes, I want to spend some time reflecting together on what does being a nature writer mean here on the brink of climate catastrophe, in the age of the sixth extinction, when a new way is being imagined and born. Now, I could speak for all evening about the many roles of the nature writer. Perhaps you could add to this list to celebrate the living world, to extend our imagination, to incite wonder, nurture compassion, to sound the alarm, to challenge the forces that threaten life, to agitate in defense of the living world. All of these and more are the legitimate and worthy roles of the nature writer. I wish I could talk about all of those tonight, but I had to choose. And so I feel best equipped to think about the role of not the nature writer, but of this nature writer. And you know me as Robin Wall Kimmerer, but the person really who is walking the path that led to this place, her name is Shabadas Gegish Kokwe. And in our ways, our names are a gift to us, which carries a teaching as to what is our responsibility while we are here on Turtle Island. And it's not a prescription or directions, but it's up to the carrier of that name to try to understand what guidance comes from it, the gifts and the responsibilities. And my name in our language, Shabadas Gegij Kokwe, means the light shining through Sky Woman. And it refers to these beams of light that stream down from the clouds and touch the earth. And so in interrogating and trying to understand this, I have to say, what do those rays do? What is their work? To create beauty, to connect matter and spirit, and to illuminate a beautiful place on the earth's surface. And that, I believe, is the role of this nature writer, to shine a light, to illuminate the green lives around us so that we might see them. Because conservation biologists speak of an epidemic of what they call plant blindness in our country. So especially to illuminate the lives of plants. And as a writer steeped in both the Western scientific tradition of natural history and ecological sciences and the indigenous philosophy worldview of indigenous science, the role of this nature writer is to illuminate an entirely different worldview, an understanding of what it is to be human in relationship to Mother Earth. To be informed by intelligences not our own, by the aspen people, by the pine people, the beaver people, the deer people. We say, look to each other, that if we see and listen, we will learn, that we will start to be able to read what the land, that greatest of teachers, has been telling us. So if the land is our teacher, how can we be better students? And the answer is always pay attention. And we have to pay attention. Nature writers from Thoreau onward have entreated us to do so. And when we think about paying attention, that remarkable focused convergence of our senses and our feeling, it's so appropriate, isn't it, that we call it paying attention, that we pay it, for it's a near universal form of currency. It is exchangeable, valuable, and incurs an expense, for attention, as we all know, is a limited resource. In a world where I'm told that the average American schoolchild can recognize over 100 different corporate logos, but fewer than 10 plants. That means our attention has been hijacked, doesn't it? Is it any wonder that we live in a society that recognizes legal personhood for those corporations and no legal standing at all for plants or for blue jays? We have to change that. And to pay attention with all our ways of knowing, mind, body, emotion, and spirit. I think of Mary Oliver's wonderful words, I don't know much about prayer, but I do know about paying attention. In a world that gives us maple syrup and spotted salamanders and sandhill cranes, shouldn't we at least be paying attention? It is an ongoing act of reciprocity. It's the gift that keeps on giving, in which attention generates wonder, which generates more attention and more joy. Paying attention to the more than human world doesn't only lead to amazement, it also leads to acknowledgement of pain. Open and attentive, we see and feel equally the beauty and the wounds, the old growth and the clear cut, the mountain and the mine. Paying attention to suffering sharpens our ability to respond, to be responsible. This too is a gift for when we fall in love with the living world. We can't be bystanders to its destruction. Attention becomes intention, which coalesces itself as action. The role of the nature writer, perhaps, to inform. I was such a geeky child. When I was a kid in school with dried mushrooms under my bed and pressed plants everywhere. My mother was very tolerant. I was an avid reader of old-time natural history. And among one of my favorite shelves in the the library, believe me, the bookstore did not have them, was the shelf devoted to John Burroughs, a nature writer, of course. He was an advocate for learning to see. He made natural history a part of American public education and made it the responsibility of every citizen to know their plants rather than their corporate logos. And taking a historical perspective, there certainly was a time when the work of the nature writer was to inform. But today, in the age of information overload, when information is at our fingertips, we're beyond needing more knowledge. It is wisdom that we need. And recent AAAS studies tell you something that you probably already know, and that is that in their research, they found out that information doesn't change people's minds. Right? And we need to change people's minds in the urgency of climate change. Another recent climate report contained what we might think of as good news, that we have all the knowledge that we need to solve the climate issue, that we have all the technology that we need. The governance structures are in place to make radical shifts, to protect the paradise that is Earth. We know what to do, but we don't do it. What is the missing piece that has us virtually paralyzed? What is the work of the nature writer now? I think that one contributing factor is that we are trapped in an old story and we have not yet found a new one to guide us. The old story, oops, how does this work? There we go. From a worldview that thinks about land as rights, as property, as capital and natural resources, to a worldview in which land is understood as so much more, as identity, our sustainer, the home of our more than human relatives, the source of ancestral connection, and to the ancestors that we will one day be. Land as the teacher, as the library, as the source of knowledge, land as the pharmacy, land as inspirited, land as home, land never as a place for which we claim property rights, but for which we humbly accept moral responsibility, because the land is sacred. For this worldview to change, we will need a new language, or maybe an old one. When we think about the way that language was taken from our people at places like Carlisle Indian School, where my grandfather was a student, we have to think about the power of language to help us reshape that worldview, to help us find that new story. And I want to think about, why was our language so dangerous to a colonizing nation that they had to violently take it from the mouths of our children? Because this was a language which spoke of the land as responsibility, not as rights, not as property and natural resources. So the role of the nature writer is perhaps to change the story from thinking about the land as machine and nature as object to the land as family, the land as community of subjects. Role of the nature writer to illuminate multiple ways of knowing. Much of my work has been engaged in illuminating Indigenous science and worldview as pathways to sustainability, to reclaiming a just relationship with the land. Let me give you just one example of why this matters so much. I'm guessing that this UN report on biodiversity is not on your bedside table, nor should it be, because it is the report that talks about the catastrophic decline in biodiversity, the insect apocalypse, the 70% loss of all songbirds in 50 years. It will give you nightmares. There is, however, one bright spot in that report, and that is that there are places on the planet where that's not happening. Biodiversity loss is much less, much lower in Indigenous stewarded homelands. And shouldn't we be asking why? What are the techniques of Indigenous land management, philosophy, and worldview, the cultural values of Indigenous ways of being that in fact shepherds the safety, the protection, and the flourishing of our relatives? And why should that be? It is estimated that today, 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity is Indigenous homelands. Wow, indeed. And so just this one example, I hope, gives us some gravity to the importance of illuminating another way of being. The thing that I want to share with you at this moment, though, is this map, which is hotspots of biodiversity, overlaid on hotspots of language diversity. And what we see is there is a very strong correlation between biodiversity hotspots and Indigenous language hotspots as well. So I want to think together about the role of nature writing in helping us to find a new language. How can Indigenous languages and worldview contribute to the healing of the earth? Just as we have deep regard and practical reverence for old growth forests, can we bring our minds together as well around the sanctity, the protection, and flourishing of old growth cultures? And to think about the generativity, the learning that can come from two-eyed seeing of understanding the world through multiple ways of knowing. There's so much guidance in Indigenous language about how we might go forward together. Here's just one tiny example. Look at this beautiful word. The word for tree in my language literally means landholder. Do you suppose that we would be clear-cutting on steep slopes if we said we're going to go out and murder the landholders? These are powerful formulas for thinking differently about our relationship to the land. And replacement of language didn't just occur in the Indian boarding schools. It occurred through so many different venues of erase and replace, which is known as linguistic imperialism. The erasure of the original language of a place and the imposition of the colonizer language. It continues to be a tool of colonization today all around the world, contributing to the extinction of languages everywhere. And one of the most, I find, pernicious examples of linguistic imperialism is this little tiny word here. It, right? Well, you think, well, it's just a little pronoun. How bad could that be? But when we look at our relatives here, when we look at the salamanders and the robins and the strawberries, in English, can we agree that if we don't know their name, and by and large we don't, we just call them it? It is singing, it is growing, right? And we don't think twice about this. But let's stop for a second, because how many times do you say this every day? Itting the natural world. What does that mean to it, the natural world. What if my grandma came here on stage to bring me a drink of water and I said, it has its apron on? What just happened there, right? I made her into a thing. My beloved grandmother I reduced to nothing. I stole her humanity. I degraded her by calling her it. We all agree that we don't do that, right? Do we call members of our own family it? Do we call members of our own species it? We do not. And yet, we speak of the living world freely with this pronoun of objectification. It makes me think there is it's no coincidence that English is the language of global capitalism and commerce, because doesn't itting the world, objectifying the world, make it more easy? It gives us permission to turn earthly gifts into commodities and into natural resources. I think this is a very dangerous word. We are in a time of developing new languages, new pronouns, for example, all around us. And I think it's time that we do exactly that. In indigenous ways of knowing, in learning my Potawatomi language, it's very difficult to learn because we speak a grammar of animacy, as been referred to. It's not only could I never say it about my grandmother, I could never say it about this monarch butterfly or these goldenrods and asters. It's impossible in our language to speak of the living world as object. We use the same grammar for everyone in the living world as we do for our family, because it's our family. This is the kinship worldview, isn't it? Where we have to think very carefully about how it is that we consume and take from the earth, because these are our relatives, not objects and not commodities. And as a scientist, it gives me pain in having to write scientific articles about plants who have been my teachers for decades. Everything I've learned about them, and I have to call them it on the page. It's so disrespectful. And so I began thinking about how could we decolonize our language to come up with new pronouns for the living world. A modest proposal. I always hated diagramming sentences and learning grammar in school, as my editors will attest. But I like to think about these pronouns as the pronouns of the revolution. And I want to share with you why. I worked with my language teacher to say, could we, inspired by the animacy in our language, that when we do have objective language as well, there are things that deserve to be its, and in our language we have inanimate cases to talk about pencils and bulldozers and things like that. But there is a different verb to hear a blue jay and an airplane, because one is animate and one is inanimate, always giving respect to the personhood of all beings. And so my teacher, the late Stuart King Bunn, helped me with this project. I said, Stuart, isn't there a word just that means it's a being? Doesn't matter whether you're a he or a she. You're just a being. You're a member of the family of life. And he worked with me on this. And it turns out that in our language, he said, I think we would say that b'madaziaki, an earth being, someone who lives here with us, here all together. I had no illusions that b'madaziaki was going to slide into English anytime soon. But the last part of that word is aki, which means the land, which means earth. And that little phoneme at the end, ki, is largely unclaimed in the English language. And so we proposed in our modest proposal that in order to speak respectfully and lovingly of other beings, we could say ki. In this case, our ki is eating berries. Ki is growing in the forest clearing. Not it, but you who are an earthly relative, someone else who is living here on the earth. And my students have been playing with this in writing and in daily practice. And of course, they say they stumble just a little bit over this. But as they said, it makes us happy. And you know, if we're going to go around inventing pronouns, we're going to have some kind of grammar here, some rules. And of course, we're going to need a plural. We'll need to speak of all those bears and all those berries. And within the Potawatomi language, one of the ways that we can pluralize things is to add an N. Thank you. Oh my gosh, indeed. We already have the word, don't we? We already have the word, the plural of geese, so that when those geese are flying south for the winter, we can say, our kin are going on vacation. Have a good time, come back soon. We're going to miss you. I don't think we need any more words to isolate us from the living world, to convert the living world to natural resources. But this is a way in which language can transform our relationship to land and to invite us into a worldview of kinship. I urge you to practice, try it out. And you know, so often in an audience like this, and I'll wait for it tonight, somebody will come up to me and say, you know what ki means in our language? I've heard it means my mother. I've heard it means a tree. Last night, two wonderful Dene women came and told me it means my relative. There's some power in this word. And the notions that underlie that word is the personhood of all beings, that everyone is a person, not an object. And this is not only a linguistic development, but it is a legal development. It is a part of environmental justice around the world. You are looking in this photograph at the Wanganui River, the sacred river of the Maori in Aotearoa. And for years, Maori leaders have agitated for the recognition of the intrinsic rights of that river, the right not to be dammed, the right not to have PCBs poured into it, that river ought to have an opportunity to determine its own fate. And it was just a couple of years ago that legal personhood was recognized for the river, for the Wanganui River. And this has been part of an international movement for which we're going to need those pronouns, right? In Ecuador and in Bolivia, did you know that in their constitutions, the rights of Mother Earth are enshrined? We can't even get the Equal Rights Amendment in this country, right? We can do this. Before the United Nations, there has a long-standing declaration of the rights of Mother Earth that we can get behind. In many cases, this work is being led by Indigenous partners. It was just a few years ago that the Yurok people amended their tribal constitution to give rights of personhood to the Klamath River. There are so many beautiful examples. What else might be the roles of the nature writer? To illuminate the stories of other beings. Oh, sorry, I was not quite there yet. Go back. I want also to say that one of the tools of the nature writer is to cultivate remembering. This is the job to help remember ourselves as a member of the human family that we speak of with these new pronouns, that we are a member of community, not masters of the universe. We are one member of a democracy of species. And as we consider together the aftermath of colonization, which has not, by the way, ended, you could think of these times, these last 500 years of Homo industrialis, as the age of dismembering. Dismembering ecosystems, communities, soils, watersheds, peoples. That root word to dismember, to cut apart, to exclude, to isolate, to cut off so that what was once whole lies broken in pieces. And as a result, many humans in this moment feel ourselves to be outcasts, no longer members of the community of life, no longer belonging. But I believe, and in the response to braiding sweetgrass, what I have learned from communities everywhere is that we are in the era of the great remembering. Remembering stories, remembering language and medicines, remembering what our ancestors brought us here for and what our descendants ask of us, to become members of the family of more than human beings, to renew our bonds of kinship. And it's not enough to only remember. We are called not only to pick up what was left for us, but to create new stories, new words, new medicines for this moment, so that we leave behind our own wisdom and tools for our descendants, just as the ancestors left theirs for us. This is the essence of adaptation, of acts of imagination, drawing upon our indigenuity, our artists, our scientists, our healers, our leaders. What are the stories that we need to guide us through a time of climate change, to carry us through the narrowing which is upon us? And I'm deeply interested in who gets to tell those stories, because we are not the only ones here living in this web of kinship with our more than human relatives. If we view other beings as persons with their own gifts and responsibilities, aren't they storytellers too? Shouldn't they be included in our family of nature writers? So as promised, I want to bring us back to that white pine, to that cup of white pine tea, and end a literary event with a reading that will, I hope, help us illuminate this notion of what is it to listen to our more than human kinfolk, and what might we learn for the path ahead. This is an excerpt from a piece called The Scribe of the Forest. My favorite place to read on a summer's day is leaning against the bole of a big old white pine. There's almost always a hollow there, upholstered in a coppery brocade of pine needles with comfy armrests on the buttressed roots. And in this woodland library, I have one book on my lap and the other against my back. One written on cellulose, one written in cellulose. When I sit with white pines, I wordlessly come to know things that I didn't know before. Traditional cultures who sit beneath the white pines recognize that human people are only one manifestation of intelligence in the living world. Other beings, from otters to ash trees, are understood as persons, possessed of their own gifts, responsibilities, and intentions. And this is not some kind of mistaken anthropomorphism. Trees are not misconstrued as leaf-wearing humans, but respected as unique, sovereign beings equal to or exceeding the power of humans. Seneca scholar John Mohawk wrote that according to his culture, quote, an individual is not smart, but merely lucky. Lucky to be part of a system that has intelligence. Be humble about this, he counsels. The real intelligence isn't the property of an individual. The real intelligence is the property of the universe itself. What if you were a great teacher, a holder of knowledge, a vessel of stories, but had no audible voice with which to speak? What if your listeners presumed you to be mute, save for the passive whispering of your needles in the wind? How would you bring your truth into the world? Wouldn't you dance your story in branch and root? Wouldn't you write it in the eloquence of cellulose, in the lasting archive of wood? Plants tell their stories not by what they say, but by what they do. They tell their story in their bodies, in an alphabet once as familiar as the song of every bird, which we have also forgotten as we become afflicted, not only with plant blindness, but plant deafness as well. If you know how to see, their storytelling goes deeper than the curve of that windward branch. Everything that affects the pine is expressed in its body. The tree is an integrator of all its experience and that of the surrounding community. When you have learned its lexicon, the story of the weevils, the story of the drought, the fire, the blister rust, the wind, and the canoe makers is all plainly written, and more. Imagine if you had a sheet of paper made of cellulose cell walls with abstract little black marks laid down in lines across its surface. What if those black marks made a coherent pattern that could be decoded to yield information? What if that information conveyed meaning about natural phenomena such as climate and disease? If that information correlated with the known history of the world? Wouldn't you call it writing? But we don't. In trees, we only call it growth, as if the cells, each distinctive as handwriting, were only made for one function, as if the human throat were made only for respiration and not for singing. All of these cells have internal functions for the trees. They conduct water, provide rigidity, they transport resin and store starch. Why not store information as well? What are we missing because of a failure of imagination, caught up in the narrow Western materialist thinking of the object? What if we proceeded from the notion of the intelligence of all beings? What might we learn if we took off the lenses of human exceptionalism and saw beyond ourselves into a world of beings possessed of gifts of their own? What happens if we start to examine the dendrochronological record with the humility to explore the literature of trees? My mind explodes to dream of what pines might write out of their stillness and arboreal perceptions, from a consciousness that transcends underground and reaches to the sky. Intimate with birds and snails and ancient lichens, the mysteries of water, the stories of lightning, and the gossip of mycorrhizae, and the poetry of light. You know they tell jokes. Haven't you heard the chuckles of the nuthatches? Do they remember the weight of passenger pigeons? The breath of glaciers, the taste of strontium in the rain? Could they tell us what it is to stand in the sun and fulfill your destiny without chasing it? How to create lasting relationships when you can't run away? Could they guide us through the narrows of climate catastrophe toward a new way to live? No. No. Not unless we're willing to imagine the mind of the pine, who writes its own story and ours. Mi iu, mi gwech bizindawieg. Thank you for listening. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
I just hid my purse behind that plant like Aretha Franklin when she would come on stage. I hope no one saw it. Thank you so much, Dr. Kimmerer, for that wonderful talk. I don't know, I think I saw several pens scribbling while things were happening, and several notes apps being opened to take notes on what you said. Hi, everybody. My name's Elena Passarello. I direct the MFA program in creative writing here at Oregon State University. And we are coming to the end of a wonderful day with Dr. Kimmerer, in which so many of our students have gotten to engage with her. We took a wonderful walk outside. We held cattail fluff. I don't know, what would you call the substance that we held? The fluff of cattails. One of our students, Natalie, said, "This has just been the best day." So I would like to thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for making the best day for some of our students here who we love and cherish so much. And it's just meant the world to me to see them be a part of this. Speaking of being a part of this, we also knew in December, when this venue sold out, that there were going to be a lot of people who wanted to talk to you who weren't going to necessarily be in this room. We've been at the high schools in Corvallis. We've been at the public library. We've been talking to lots of different people. And so we decided, instead of having the Q&A just be with folks here, we have questions coming from all over the community. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Great. And I want to show you guys the stack of questions that we have amassed from Corvallis. I sort of feel like James Lipton from Inside the Actors Studio. You know, like, look at this hefty thing. Thank you for laughing. Okay. Our first question does come from someone who's here tonight, an anonymous person who would like to know, how do you communicate the importance of reciprocity? There are actually a lot of questions about reciprocity here in this stack, especially reciprocity with nature. How do you communicate that to those who may be unreceptive or value more economical aspects of ecosystems?
Well, especially for folks who think about ecosystems primarily as a source of well-being and economic prosperity, well, where does that come from? It comes from the renewal of the land. You know, as an ecologist, as anybody who's studied science, we know from the laws of thermodynamics that they haven't been repealed for we humans. Right. And those laws of give and take. You cannot keep taking relentlessly without giving back. And so, you know, it simply makes common sense to give back to the land. And the invitations in Braiding Sweetgrass around reciprocity are, what does reciprocity look like if you have a garden? What does it look like if you're doing restoration work, healing of the land? What does it look like with your neighbor? What does reciprocity look like intergenerationally? I think reciprocity is something we already know. When you give me something, I want to give you something. And so how do we extend what we know about relationships with one another within our species to the more than human world? That's the invitation.
Can I ask you what reciprocity looks like if you're a writer, or when you are a writer?
Oh, yeah. I think of writing as an act of reciprocity for the privilege of as a scientist, as a human, as a gardener, the privilege of learning from plants, from eating plants, from little things like breathing oxygen. I think I owe them something. And so for me, writing is an act of reciprocity, to be able to share with others what the plants have shared with me. So that is part of my deep commitment to that work, is giving back to the world that has taught me.
It's like how you store the experiences that the world has given you is in your writing. Is that right?
Yeah, store it and share it.
Store and then share.
Right.
It makes me think of, like farm day-to-day manuals. Have you ever seen these that often women would keep in agrarian America, where they would just write every day one sentence of something that happened? August 9th, fog, the crops came in. And it just looks like this little day book, but really that person is storing the information of their land, of their farm, of their place, for I don't know who to read.
Yes, certainly true. Just like the pine is storing its story in its trunk and in its wood. It is, I think, a very natural inclination of storytelling species, which are many.
Yes, amen. Oh, speaking of, I just learned something from you when you told me that. Here's another question we have from someone who's in the audience tonight who would like to know what advice you would give a new teacher. Teaching is so important to the Stone Award, and I know it's very important to you. So where would you tell a new teacher to start, or to start thinking?
Oh, there's so many dimensions to that, but I am immediately flashing back to my own days as a new teacher. When I was so puffed up with what I knew, with knowledge and authority, right? That I had to stand up in front of that classroom and impart knowledge. And you know, I've thrown that model out the window. Both am I not the authority, but that's not how we learn, right? To me, what I learned in teaching was to get out of my way, to get out of my own way. My job as a teacher is to introduce the students to the real teacher, which is experience and land and observation. And I delight in doing that now, of hardly telling people anything, but just saying, look at this, pay attention. What do you see going on here? And then this symbiosis, this reciprocity between the land and the students, or between, doesn't have to be the landscape, between the book that they're reading, the specimen that they are studying. There's this reciprocity of observer and observed. And so I just try to be an interpreter and a translator of that primary exchange.
That's so hard to do. It's so hard to relax when you feel like you have a certain kind of educational responsibility. Have you always been a teacher? When did you know that teaching was something that you wanted to have be a part of your life?
What a great question. You know, I haven't really thought about the when of it, but probably when I was in graduate school and I had to be a teaching assistant. Right. Which to me meant I was going to grade a lot of quizzes, which I did. But I discovered I loved teaching. I loved watching people, because I teach botany classes, and I don't know about you, but mostly on the first day of a botany class, people are saying like, really? I have to learn about photosynthesis. They think it's going to be awful. And so I love the first day of class where they're like, oh man, this is so interesting. I love that wonder, that excitement. So,
you can feel it when the room starts to shift and go, oh, wait a minute, this is going to be a good time.
Yeah.
Like you can, it's almost, that's the part of teaching that sort of almost feels like comedy or performance or something. You get to kind of know your audience on a more of an atomic level.
That's right. This story didn't work. Let's try another one.
Let's pivot.
And for me, that's a lot of reciprocity with writing, because after decades of being a teacher, you know, you read those faces. They're like, that didn't land. They don't know what I'm talking about. So let me try this, and let me try this. And so I know that there is a strong interplay for me between my writing and my teaching, because I'm always learning from both.
Speaking of writing and teaching, one of my favorite chapters in Braiding Sweetgrass is the Amazing Grace chapter. I don't know if y'all know that one right offhand, but it's when Dr. Kimmerer is teaching sort of outside of her home space in Kentucky, and there's kind of a field trip with these future medical students where you're learning about all these different, like you were saying, like kind of the first way that you don't teach anymore, kind of like, this is the name of this, memorize this, learn this, learn this.
That's what I was doing.
Which was a relief to me to know too that like we all kind of have been there. But then at the end of this field trip, the students kind of walking back home just start singing Amazing Grace together and harmonizing. This is a community too that is sort of faith-based in a way that maybe was maybe new to you as a teacher. It's such a beautiful chapter. It just when I led the library session a couple of weeks ago, the first question that we asked about Braiding Sweetgrass was, okay, what made you cry? And that was the one that verklempt me as a Southerner and as a teacher. I just have to know. I'll pretend that this was written on a note card. Oh, this was written by Elena Passarello, who I think. How did writing that piece come about? It's different from some of the other pieces in Braiding Sweetgrass. So many of the chapters have their own identities. What was it like to put that together? How long from when it happened did you write it, and what was the process like?
Yeah, well, in creating Braiding Sweetgrass, I was really trying to be mindful to present lots of examples of what reciprocity looks like. And so the reciprocity between student and teacher is what I was trying to exercise there. And that story, that was my first teaching job when that happened. So it was, 15 years, 20 years before I wrote the essay. Yeah, but it has just lived so deeply in me, that rain of silver bell blossoms over the trail, while I'm thinking, oh, I've so messed up. All I gave them was data and missed the real point. But then they sang, and I knew that even though I'd messed up, the land hadn't. The land showed them. Could I share a tiny Oregon-related story about that?
Absolutely.
In that story, I was teaching in the Bible Belt, teaching biology in the Bible Belt, and I remember waxing eloquent about something at the top of this moment, and a rather annoying young man said to me, he was seeing my passion for this, and he said, "What is this, your religion or something?" And so I kind of hemmed and hawed about that. I should have said yes. And he really was annoying that whole trip. Would you like to hear the next time I saw that young man?
Yes, please. Yeah.
I was invited to give a lecture for the Mackenzie River Trust a few years ago. And we're getting all ready, and the director of the Trust comes up to me afterwards and says, "You know that story about silver bells when you were teaching in Kentucky?" I said, yeah, I really value that chapter. He said, "Me too." And he said, "That was me."
That's Joe?
It's Joe Mall.
That's Joe! He told me that story, and he told me that, or not that story, but he told me that he was on a trip with you, and he started singing "The Hills Are Alive with the Sound of Music."
Knowing what I say. Yes.
You said to him, and I love that this is your first year teaching, but you already had this kind of a flex. You were like, "Joe, people are going to want to enjoy this in their own ways, so maybe we don't need to sing right now."
I'm so glad to be able to tell this in an audience of people who know Joe, and of this transformation from this total skeptic to the director of the Mackenzie River Trust.
Oh, I love it.
To Joe.
Teaching.
Teaching.
Okay, how about...
Hard to top that, I know.
Yeah. I think this was pretty great, actually. This is from one of our library events that we did, a sort of braiding sweetgrass conversation that welcomed members of the community as well as students. Rachel, who's a bio major at OSU, would like to know, how would you advise young scientists who want to adhere to indigenous wisdom in their work, especially those in the natural sciences?
Oh, I so appreciate that question, because it's something I work with my own students all the time. And the best guidance that I've been able to give around how to use the tools of Western science, but informed by values, indigenous values, is to say that in order to do science, you don't have to adopt the Western scientific worldview alone. It is this notion of two-eyed seeing, of embracing both ways of knowing and using the best of each. So what I counsel my students is, what would it look like to use the tools of Western science guided by the values of indigenous knowledge, so that we can use the tools of Western science so appropriately and powerfully. I am a scientist. I know the value of these tools for hypothesis testing. When we want to know a true, false kind of question about the nature of the world, I'm going to go with hypothesis testing every time. But not all the questions are true, false. When we have this intersection of values and culture and the living world, we need something more expansive than the Western scientific method. And indigenous science, which honors subjective and objective ways of knowing, is more holistic. And so that's what I tell them, is remember that these are tools, and the skill comes in knowing your tools really well and knowing when to employ each one.
How has the receptiveness of students to people like Rachel who are asking these kinds of questions, how is her community, her cohort, her group of scientists different from when you were beginning to incorporate this in your teaching 15 years ago, 20 years ago, however many years ago?
Yeah, I'm really seeing students leading the way. Students with their openness to pluralism in ways of thinking that was not inculcated into us as young people, just wasn't part of our education. In fact, we're often taught to marginalize other ways of knowing, let's be honest about it. But this generation of students is so open and has a lot of fluency with trying on and imagining different ways of being. The intersection between thinking about social justice and science, social justice and climate and everything is a whole new world of intersection and power that's emerging from that in ways that I think are going to be transformative and led by students.
I think too, and I don't know if I can get to this note card quickly enough, but there were quite a few questions about, what do you think, says someone from Karen Holmberg's Gathering Moss Book Club event, about the connections between poetry and language and human relationships with the natural world? I feel like this connects to what we were just talking about in terms of the pluralism of Western science and indigenous thinking and how there's space in the student mindset to do this work. Well, let's add art into it. What do you think about the connections between poetry/language and human relationships with the natural world? In your mind, how do creative literature, those kinds of arts empower, how do they empower each other?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that question. And I think one of the ways that I want to answer that is to say that one of the things that I find unites art and science is attention. The very thing we're talking about tonight is both of them are the practice of attention and then making meaning from the patterns that one observes in the world, whether in sculpture or in an experiment. And so they have that in common. And for me, an education which integrates poetry and science, let's say, we think of them as disparate, but I really think they inform one another. For example, as a writer, as we know, we want exactly the right word.
Yes.
Right? We want just the right word. Nothing else will do. Well, that's true in botany too. That in our relatives right here, there is a name for every little spot on that plant. And to use the wrong word, you're talking about a different spot. You're talking about a different reality, a different function. So there's a great deal of precision and beauty, I find, in the specificity and discipline of scientific language. What a gift for poetry.
Amen.
Right? To know it's this word that I need and not that other one because it has a different color. It means something different. So in that way, I think that science and poetry reinforce one another. And working in the opposite way, I would say also that for me as a writer, I am always thinking in metaphor. It's just how I see the world. And for me as a natural scientist and as a writer, I deal in those metaphors. And so when I have a metaphor from the living world, it informs my science because I see the limits of that metaphor. I think, well, it doesn't really work in this situation, which leads to a science experiment. Like, oh, what's going on? It worked. It was working all along, but there's a disruption in force. So I need to pursue that as a scientific question. So to me, they're in very creative conversation with each other.
I'm so curious about what attention looks like to you when you're at your desk, and it sounds like it's picking the right word, it's testing a metaphor. Are there any other ways that immediately come to mind when you think, oh, this is what it feels like, looks like, what the practice is when I am paying attention as a writer, as someone not out in the field, but at the desk?
At the desk, yeah. I think another element of that process for me is the sound. the sound of the words and the cadence and the musicality of writing. I am always reading out loud, and to just see, it's my test, is this right? It has to sound right. It can be correct, for example. It could be the right word, but if it doesn't sound right, it leads me to continue or to pare away because of the sound of it. So there's that sort of art of it as well.
You can hear that when you listen to your audiobook. You can hear you listening, you can hear you speaking sounds that you have tested in ways that mean more than just, oh, these are going to communicate effectively, these are going to look good on the page. They're sounds that mean something to the person who's speaking them, which is why the audiobook is such a gem, like a total gem. It makes me think of what you were saying too over there about orality and oral traditions and how important it is for multi-special storytelling, I guess. Absolutely, yeah. And that is one of our primary ways of sensing the stories in the world, of listening to birds and insects and water and wind. And, I think about in the Potawatomi language, for example, our language is made up of the sounds of the land. It's all automatopoeia. So that to me is this power of attention, is that the land informed the language, and then when we speak that language, we're calling on the land in our experience on the land. This is just a guess, but did you tell stories to your children orally? Were you a storytelling mama when you were? Yeah, sure. Yeah, as well as a reader. Yeah, even to the point that my kids were probably way too old for bedtime stories, but we would sit around and read out loud. Yeah, just for the pleasure of it. Are there other ways in which being a mother feels connected to who you are as a storyteller? Who I am as a This was on a card from Marvin. Oh, her again? Yeah, good job. I love that question, to think about it in terms of, as a storyteller, I'll give you the answer that I wish were true. Okay. And that is that, like in teaching, that I told my children stories that would be guidance rather than scolding them and telling them what they ought to do. I did a lot of that. I'm a mother. But I also really tried to think, to have my kids think, in sort of an arc of what will happen if, to sort of play out scenarios. What would happen if you made that choice? What would happen if you made that choice? Those are in my better moments. Those also sound like scientific hypotheses as well. What would happen if? It's true. It's true. Yeah. We don't have a ton more time, and you've been so generous with your time today, but I do want to get a few more questions in. This one is from Trinity, an audience member here, who says, "Hi!" Exclamation point. "Thank you for all the work you do! Exclamation point. You are amazing, too! Exclamation points." That's the question. No, I'm just kidding. Trinity says, "I have been pondering a lot lately if an invasive species ever feel homesick. I would love your thoughts, period." I love your question. I'll bet they do. I'll bet they do. To find yourself, without all of your companions, where the soil tastes different, where people talk funny. And that opens the doorway to thinking about how is it that we overcome that homesickness, which is by becoming at home, right? And we think about invasive species that we often tar with this brush. Oh, they're bad. They came from someplace else. I find that a deeply puzzling attitude from colonizers. Only native species allowed. But
But I think also there's that process that by which foreign species that come here become at home. They become what we call naturalized species. That's what we call them in botany and ecology. Species that have been here for such a long time and have integrated with the natural communities here, that find their niche and stay within it. And these we call naturalized species, and they were adopted by many indigenous cultures as food and medicine because they were here. They were bringing their gifts. They were fulfilling their responsibilities to their home. They were homemaking, and so they were absolutely embraced as members of the community, even though they didn't come from here. And so it is, I think, reciprocity that makes a home. So how would those invasive species who are homesick become at home? I think by offering their gifts to the beings who are around them and receiving the gifts of the others who are there.
What was the word that or the phrase that your students use? One of your students uses to describe a weed. It's not a weed, but it's a
self-growing vegetable.
A self-growing vegetable.
Yeah. One of my wonderful students has a little book. Her name's Tusha Yakovleva, and she published a little book called Self-Growing Vegetables. It's how to eat the weeds in your garden that grow better than what you planted.
Okay, last question, and it's just a little bitty one. It's from one of our library events that we did at the Corvallis Public Library. Just a teeny little question for you, Dr. Kimmerer. Which social change would have the most positive impact on our world, do you think? My baby started crying when I asked that question.
Where to start, right? You know, if I could choose just one thing to change, and I feel like that is, you know, something that I deeply try to create in storytelling, because that's my hope, you know, is this cultural shift. And I think we are in the place that we are, this place of peril for ourselves and for our more than human relatives as well. To put it plainly, we haven't loved the world enough. And so to me, the social change is to remember what it would be like to love the land and to know that the land loves you back. And if we could get to that place, it feels to me that many of the challenges that we face would evaporate.
So put yourself in a position to actually and actively love the space that you live in, your home.
Your home.
That's great.
And be loved by that space.
Well, I mean, it's Friday. I love having homework over the weekend, homework. So I think we should all get out and do that. Dr. Kimmerer, thank you so very much for your time. Thank you.
But wait, there's more.
Oh, no.
There's more coming.
Only easy one? Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
We would like to close with a little something special that we have for you. I'd like to introduce Mr. Chance Whitehead, who is the inaugural Director of Tribal Relations here at OSU, and the two students who presented the land acknowledgement at the beginning of our program, Bryn Balecki and Monroe Fox. Welcome, y'all.
We do.
I just wanted to check. Oh, there we go. I just wanted to take a moment to just say hi, Mossy. Many thanks for joining us today. I saw your schedule. It was a stacked day even before you came here this evening with all of us. This has been a wonderful, wonderful engagement. We just want to say thank you. We have a couple of gifts for you. First, I have a question about the second gift. So I want to start here with our 8th gen blanket. This is the Oregon Potlatch blanket. This is designed and co-produced by Sherrod Yonker, who's a Coquille tribal member and artist, and Tony Johnson, who is the tribal chairman of Chinook Indian Nation. If you look, there are 9 different designs on this blanket. These are traditional basket weaving designs. And the reason there are 9 of them is because each tribe in Oregon, there's 9 tribes in Oregon, said that these are our basket weaving designs, and so each tribe is represented by their traditional basket weaving design on this blanket. And there's a 10th design on the edges, you can see here, all along the edges, those are people. And those people are representative of those folks that were indigenous to this territory, now more formally known as the state of Oregon, who were forcefully removed and now take up space in Washington, California, Nevada, Idaho, and some as far as Oklahoma. And so we were trying to get all of the, I believe, trying to get all of the indigenous peoples of Oregon represented on this blanket. Potlatch is often, was described to me anyway, as a demonstration of wealth, which looks radically different in the Northwest, because in the Northwest there was a gift-giving economy in operation here. So your wealth was not measured by what you owned, it was what you gave. And so I wanted to say thank you for giving us your time, your insights, your wisdom, and your energy, and spend the day with us. I was also told that you enjoy writing by hand. Is that correct?
That is correct. I write longhand, yeah.
I was also told that you prefer a yellow notepad and a purple pen, which was very specific.
It's true. It's
okay,
true.
so Tim Jensen, who kind of orchestrated this whole evening, wanted to make sure that you walked away with a yellow notepad and a purple pen to continue your great work. So,
You're correct. You're correct.